to a special edition of Babes with Books.
Look
We
at how
have
many babes are around the
amazing babes that are joining us this evening. These are our babes. And this month we are talking about recommended reads that were recommended from our significant others. So really looking forward to talking to you about the stuff that our taller halves have recommended. I think they're taller halves in all of our
100%. Which is deceiving because I'm always sitting at a table for Babes with Books.
Yeah, you guys have no idea how short we are.
I sit on pillows. No.
Yeah. I have 4 chairs stacked. So yeah, I guess we'll just go around the table and get started right into it.
Sounds good.
So I'll start. This is Jason. I'm Leslie, and the book that Jason recommended for me to read was Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, 2 of my favorite authors, and this book was actually on my list for, like ever. And I hadn't read it yet, and so when Jason said, you should read this, that this would be a great one for that, I was like, oh, what a great idea. It's been on my list. And I loved it. It was absolutely amazing. I love the, as expected, the witty humor in it that comes from Terry Pratchett, and kind of the dark humor and really interesting scenes, I guess, that come from the Neil Gaiman influence in there. So I don't know if any of you guys have read Good Omens yet. Anyone at this table has read Good Omens?
But it sounds like a fun combination. I see what you mean by that. So strange, like that Discworld humor combined with this like dark, creepy humor.
It's like really fun. Discworld meets
Coraline kind of.
Yeah, it's so the book is about basically an angel and a demon, both present in the Garden of Eden, who it comes to the apocalypse. It's time to end the world, and they both have become quite comfortable with living on Earth, and there's quite a few things on Earth that they don't want to let go of themselves and go back to hell or heaven. So they come up with this plan to work together to stop the apocalypse.
That sounds super fun.
And some of the stuff, like the demon talks about how he doesn't have to work very hard because humans come up with stuff way more than he ever does. And a lot of the demons down in hell still want to like target people one at a time. But his favorite thing is like making the phone lines really tied up for a good hour. Then everyone goes home and they're all angry at each other, and they kick their pet or get mad at their spouse, and that's like humans just figure it all out on their own. So that's the type of stuff that's in this book. Okay. So I really liked it. So thank you, Jason, for recommending it. Why did you recommend it?
Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman are kind of both gods in their own niche.
Nice.
They're super popular. The humor is what I mostly like. To tell you the truth, it took me a long time to pick this book up because it was out of my comfort zone.
Okay.
I'm a genre reader. I only read one genre, and I don't like it straight. My roommate had a copy of it, so she kept pestering me for years to read it, and I finally did, and I regret not reading it sooner. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's really funny, and it's weird.
Okay. Now, had you read either of the authors before that?
At that point, no.
Okay.
The only thing I knew about Neil Gaiman was the Sandman graphic novels, and I really wasn't interested in them. Terry Pratchett I'd heard of as well. He was in the genre that I like. I love fantasy. At that time, then that's all I read. So I knew of him, but I hadn't really read too many Discworld books at that point. I didn't read this when it came. This came out in I think early 90s or 1991 or 92. I didn't read it until 98 or something like that.
Okay. Now I'm all intrigued.
Yeah. It's like 91 was when it, 90 when it was when it first came out.
Yeah. So I was pretty young when that came out.
This one's really old too.
Yeah. So, What else is down the table? It's very interesting, actually.
I know. I think it's really funny that we all have the same genre.
Yeah.
So
we're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, we can go next. When I met my spouse, I had never read fantasy or science fiction. Actually, I was very much a kind of historical fiction buff. I think I pick up any book based in World War II.
History major.
Right? Yeah. Like it was just kind of where I'd always gone. I think I read one for school and that was it. And I remember being just like, no, like it's fantasy kind of thing, right? And I couldn't really I never got into it. But that is kind of what he grew up reading, was science fiction and fantasy. So when we got together, it was kind of a little bit of a thing, like, I'm going to get you to like this.
Are you calling your spouse stubborn?
Stubborn, no.
On camera?
So he introduced me, and we were actually not going to talk about necessarily one book, but an author. And it's Guy Gabriel Kay, and he's a Canadian author. And this was the first one I read. It's called The Fiona Var Tapestry. But it's actually a trilogy. So it's The Summer Tree, The Wandering Fire, and The Darkest Road. Although I think most frequently now you see it published as as one volume. Speaking of age, this is from 1984. The first one was published, so kind of old. Really neat fantasy. He combines Earth, which I kind of had to laugh as you talked about Good Omens, because it talks about there's a group of young people, I think they're like late teens, early 20s on Earth, and they get sent to a fantastical realm that they kind of have to save, and in different ways that they're kind of destined to do it. Really neat. I think there's 6 of them that go, and you get really drawn into their stories, which are all very different. And when they get drawn into this fantasy world, they're kind of tossed to different ends of it. So they're not all together, and then at the end, they all kind of come together and get brought together. And it's really just a really massive journey for a lot of them. It changes a lot of their lives for the rest of their lives. And
so it kind of has that epic Robert Jordan character development.
Yeah.
But brings them all together. Is it like YA?
No, he's an author. Like, he's an adult author. No, he's an adult author.
You just mentioned that they were kids, so I wasn't sure if that's serious.
Yeah, they're like 18 or 20. I think they're graduating from university. They know each other through university. So I read it and I was like, oh yeah, I can get behind this. I think because it's very historical. The realms that he writes about are often kind of historical. So I then devoured Guy Gabriel Kay. We have them all on our shelf. I have now read this 3 times, and I've read a few others multiple times. This is one of his newer novels, and he won some awards for it. It's called Isabel. We have a cat named after this, actually, is how much we love Guy Gabriel Kay in our house. This is a really neat book, and it comes back to Fiona Var Tapestry. So this was one of his newest books, published in like 2007 or something like that. And one of the characters, I called that 2007, is one of the characters from this book. And she's like an aunt of a main character in this. Really neat book. Again, it's bringing together the future, bringing together 2 worlds. It brings together the future and the past. And it's this warrior who's coming back over and over again to find his lost love. And they come back alive in these statues in this church in France. So really...
interesting that it has a fairly large romantic aspect to it.
Yeah, 100%. Although, that's like... It's there, but it's not like a romance fantasy.
No.
Like, some of them are. I can fully say, like, some fantasies definitely have that big. Like, I've read other ones, the Juliette Marillier and things like that. So, so when it came down to, like, talking about a recommendation, like I said, when we got together, it became kind of his, like, thing to recommend books to me and, like, to find ones that I would like in fantasy. And then now he's tried science fiction, and it has not gone over as well, hey?
It is not so far, but I think I might have one right now.
Oh,
actually,
there
that
you
I'm
go.
reading.
So,
That I just started.
honestly,
That
he
might
probably
break it.
buys, like, a
Might
new
break it.
fantasy book.
We're going to have to do this, like, on a regular every
Yeah.
6 months thing.
Well, when this came up as a topic, it was kind of a funny thing, because he does it, like, once a month. He'll, like, buy a book, and he'll be like, here, I think you'll like this one, and it's, like, a thing, like, whether I'll, like, so...
Whooshy or whooshy?
But Guy Gabriel Kay is one of my absolute favorite authors, and it was really neat to discover a new genre, actually. Almost when I felt like I was exhausting kind of another area, and now I've kind of found a whole new world of authors and fun things, and they've become some of my favorite books. But
So, JP, what made you suggest?
why did you like this? Yeah.
Please.
she actually basically already said why. Honestly, she kind of stole all my talking
I
points.
talked for a while.
I really wanted to get her into reading fantasy because one of the things that sort of attracted me to Maya was how much she enjoyed reading, and I thought that she'd really get into it if she was willing to open her mind to it. Fiona of Our Tapestry is specifically the one that I kind of broke her in with, because I remember reading it when I was in my late teens, and finding it really, it was one that really drew you in emotionally. I remember reading it and getting all weepy and stuff, like, and so I knew that would really get to
like
her,
the stories
that would
are
really
really
grab her.
And the
It's
historical
interesting that you read it
aspect,
again.
maybe.
Yeah, well, I also wanted to like break her in with Guy Gabriel Kay, because I knew that a lot of his other stuff is really historically based, and specifically a lot of it is like kind of European history based, which has always been kind of her interest area, I guess. So
you're
You
saying
like-
you
I
really
knew
know
it. I
how
knew
to
it.
manipulate your wife?
we were very young at the time.
I hate to speak for you, but you like a fantasy with a good world. You're a world building
do,
fantasy,
yeah.
and I do think he creates some pretty interesting worlds,
Yeah.
and this one especially, because he brings you to this whole fantastical realm that these 6 people just get drawn into, and like I said, because there's so many different spaces, like there's these hunters on the plains, and then there's a magical kind of element to one of them, and then there's the whole like castle and fighter element, and so he really creates a whole world, much like I will let Shauna go next.
Yeah.
Like this one you recommend.
What do you
and
got,
that's
Shauna?
kinda cool.
What did you guys bring?
Well, my husband Bruce is actually very much a nonfiction reader.
I thought you were gonna come with some really cool nonfiction that we were gonna just like wowed by.
Some really, really cool stuff. I'll let him tell you some of the titles of some of his favorite ones. But one of the series that he did read was The Game of Thrones, and I had not read them and saw him reading them and thought I'm going to give them a try as well, because he was really enjoying them, and I thought that was interesting that he was reading a fiction series at that, and a big one. So I read the first one, and I really liked it. Most people have read Game of Thrones, I think. Well, a lot of people have, or at least seen the show. So there's a lot of different characters and different, seems like different plot lines and different all sorts of crazy stuff going on, and lots of sex stuff going on, and it's just a really fun kind of story. I really like the Khaleesi character. She's my favorite. I wish the whole book was about her, actually. But I couldn't get into the second one because it just was starting to get way too violent. And as you girls know, I don't like people to die. Like, I like happy endings.
Who has forgiven George R. R. Martin?
Oh.
Ned Stark. Like, Ned Stark, really?
Right?
First book?
Yeah.
Who do you
The Red
Exactly.
Wedding? The Red Wedding.
No, I was,
Yeah.
like Ned Stark
You're
really got me.
desensitized
Like
by
the
that
first
point.
book.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah, you're like, whatever. It's
Yeah,
just-
just
Everybody's dad, right?
Just
the
dad.
Like the dad. The
Like,
dad.
what the hell? So
I know.
that was really hard for me, being my overly sensitive self. And
Amazing, inciting incident, though, to get a war started.
Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
anyway, it's a really, really well-written book, and if you can handle the violence and the dead dads and things like that, you'll love it. But I'll let Bruce talk about why he actually read.
Yeah, I really don't read a lot of fantasy and stuff. It's my go-to thing when I do, just because, again, the worlds are so immersed and that sort of thing. It's so diverse. And but yeah, I remember I really got to read this Game of Thrones because, of course, the series come out and all that. And yeah, it just grabbed me right from the first few pages.
And did you manage to keep going in this?
Oh, I read all of them. So,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah. And of course, I was shocked. It's like, oh my god, I can't believe they killed him. You know, like, and
Ned Stark.
so many surprises, but just the diversity in the characters and just all these different plots going on, and backstabbing and like what's going on here.
I think it's like the fantasy soap opera, right?
You need a
It
chart,
kind- yeah,
you need
very
a
much
chart
so.
on the wall while you're
Yeah.
reading it. If you
to
have-
try and keep track of
and then
what's
if you
going on.
watch the series, that that gives you kind of like a ground, and you're like, okay, these characters, and then you can fill it in.
I read them
the
like-
rich stuff that's in there, but yeah.
I read them like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. and
So
it's,
when if you're reading them out that, then it's like, okay.
yeah, it was much different then. Yeah. So.
I really enjoyed it. So.
So a couple things I'm interested in are the fact that all of our men have suggested fantasy for us. So I don't know if that says anything.
I made JP read Ella Montgomery once, so yeah.
I'm just curious about, like, we've talked about what men read versus what women read before, and now we have men on the panel here. So I'm just curious from our guys kind of why you, what makes you choose a book to read? Do you feel that there's a difference between what women read and men read, and what makes you choose something different? Be like, yeah, let's hear it. I know you have some awesome. This is why I'm asking this.
I don't know.
We'll be here for an hour. This is gonna be a long one.
I think that people just read what people enjoy reading.
We're in a gender
Fair
debate
enough.
going here.
No, that's all I will say.
Decent people.
People that read, I mean, there aren't really people that don't read because they're not people, but then everybody else just reads what they read. I think
You're no person.
Although I actually totally judge people for that too.
yeah.
You mean you don't read? What?
I don't have time to
I can't even
read.
talk
That's
to
me.
you.
Like,
Yeah, you
Well,
have time to
if
read.
you're sitting on the
choose
toilet and you have time to
something.
do that, just bring a book with you.
Yeah.
Totally. Instead of your
That's
phone,
a lie.
leave your
Yeah,
phone, put your
it's
phone
true.
down. Take a
Really?
book. Yeah.
You have time to read, folks.
All have time. Well, if you're watching this video, you must be engaged in reading.
It was like a YouTube suggestion.
Yeah.
Random word we say.
Maybe if I watch this, I
Game
don't
of
have to read
Thrones.
the book. I don't know. You do. So,
I do think it's interesting because I think, and I don't know how much Jason does in like book form, but you like a lot of nonfiction too. Like,
Yeah.
Not like I don't know if you read a lot of nonfiction books, but I do know like outside in other areas you do too. But is it books too?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't read fiction very much. anymore.
Yeah, I know, and that's it. JP doesn't either, and Bruce, you
and
were
that's
saying you're mostly
kind of
nonfiction
one
too.
thing I was kind of
Yeah, I
getting.
find
I
it
know at the
interesting.
library, men tend to check out mystery, hard, kind of gritty stories or
Yeah.
nonfiction, and
Yeah.
our three men tend to read nonfiction. Here at the store, do you find there's a difference between what women typically purchase and what men typically purchase,
Yeah.
or is it just being stereotypical?
There is a stereotype, but there's a stereotype, I think, for a reason. I mean, you don't see too many men going through the Nora Roberts books.
No,
really.
and I actually think,
So-
like you guys all suggested fantasy, and I would say having worked in the book industry for a number of years, like book selling, that you don't get a lot of like fantasy readers on like kind of the female side. I think you get more since Game of Thrones. Honestly, it has changed that world. Like they have started right because once a book is in like the supermarkets and Walmart for 40% off, like the people then pick those up, and then it can start a snowball effect into that. But like I'm in another book club with 13 other women, and I don't think a single one of them's probably read. Like maybe 2 or 3 have read a fantasy book.
I suppose that's the same in our
Yeah.
book club. That there's not a lot of fantasy readers. We read fantasy.
Yeah.
Do you think there's much of a chance that that's got something to do with our ages as well?
Yeah,
We're all of a particular age. And
I think
when we were kids, that was really discouraged.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
fantasy
fantasy,
reading
Mm.
at all when
Yeah.
we were all youth was discouraged.
What do you mean? I'm still a youth.
Yeah,
I mean, like prepubescent.
Okay.
people would gauge my brother
Well,
David Eddings' books
yeah.
and gave me Nancy Drew books.
I was
right?
Yeah,
gonna say,
exactly.
What
And if
people
you had
got
probably
for me.
looked at like the sort of section in a library or a bookstore, you would have seen some and you wouldn't have even seen a lot of maybe fantasy for like boys, like of a younger age, right?
I
Like
think
you're
there's
gonna get-
also an expectation that society puts on people too. So maybe there's not men in the Nora Roberts section because they feel they'll be judged if they go to the Nora Roberts section. And I'm curious if ebook reading has changed that or is different.
JP's
And
never
how
thought
many
about it.
females versus males buy romance now? Like maybe there's more males buying romance because they can buy it on their e-reader and they don't have to.
Gosh, I want to know the answer.
I know, right? We're gonna look this up.
That's a really intriguing
One of the other
thing.
things that kept coming up for us on the weekend when we were listening to writers too is that there's not a lot of stuff that's written with strong female or really good male characters.
Well, this
in
comes
those
down to the books with
right?
diversity. When I was talking,
Yeah.
even just like last month with my, what did we do last month? Erotica. And I read that book by a minority writer with minority characters. And something like romance is like 75% white women, like of this certain type kind of thing. Yeah.
So it's, more and more people are starting to write more and more of those kinds of books. So maybe it'll change as time progresses.
Interesting. I
And
feel
we're
like
writing different kinds of books and doing different kinds of things.
I definitely think there's like there's an author that I really like right now, and like I pre-order her books kind of thing. And the reason I love them so much is they are like an epic fantasy, like traditional style, like George R. R. Martin, like epic type fantasy. But the character is a female lead. Yeah.
Why weren't you telling us?
Oh, her name is Sarah Maas. I think I probably mentioned them before. She has 2 series out right now, and she's incredibly popular the world over. They are YA series, and they've started to feel more that way as I've gone on. But I am drawn to those authors that have those, like, I really like the fantasy genre now that I've been introduced to it, and some of my favorites have those strong character leads. Jacqueline Carey with Cushing's series, Juliette Marillier, and like the ones that have those strong female characters. I do still find myself drawn to, and I think there is something to be said to recognizing yourself in characters. That's, yeah.
I think there's continuing on the gender issue. Fantasy and science fiction for a good while, but increasingly recently, has been kind of on the forefront of gender diversity.
I read a really cool book. Yeah.
I've been like specifically seeking out all these ones for you that have all these like
Yeah.
non-gender conforming characters.
Yeah, the book I read last week, they use the pronoun their, like THEIR, instead of he or she, and the characters, when they get to a certain age, choose what they want to be, and they can choose
really
one,
interesting.
other, or not, like nothing.
What book
Still.
is that?
Sorry,
I don't know
I'd
what
have
it
to
We'll
look
put
it
it
up
in the
and we
link
can put
down
it in the comment.
below.
It was actually hard, and I will say, so that shows how much we are like stuck in our genders. It was hard to read for him. I was like, what is going on? Is this talking about 2 people? What? And then as I realized, no, it was just really using these pronouns. It was such an interesting.
I think it's also
so
interesting
interesting.
that people tend to write what they know, right? So that's what you always are told as a writer, write what you know. And the industry has been really largely dominated by male authors for a very long time. And so obviously, if you're male and you're writing what you know, you tend to write male characters, right? So
Yeah.
I think that more women are writing, and that is creating, and women are getting stronger and stronger, and maybe it's just that fiction is reflecting society.
So do you guys like recommending books? Did you enjoy? Did you feel pressured? Do you worry when you recommend a book whether someone's gonna like it or not? Or anybody have anything to say about how they recommend a book to someone? Or
Well, I don't like recommending books, mostly because I am a fantasy reader when it comes to fiction. So I can't recommend books to everybody because not everyone's a fantasy reader. I don't tend to read outside of my genre that often, so I don't know a lot about the books outside of the genre. I have no interest in those books really. So
just say it straight.
yeah, well, no, I mean there are some that I have, it's just kind of as a general guideline. I have, of course, read a lot of books outside of fantasy, but I never really enjoyed them as much.
So it's hard to recommend it. 'Cause
So
you
it's
didn't
hard.
enjoy
Yeah,
it.
exactly. I don't know. I've read a lot of Stephen King, for example, but I don't really love them. I just kind of read them because they were cool when I was a teenager, and that's what my friends read, type of a thing. Things like that. My dad had a lot of westerns growing up, so I read a lot of those, and I couldn't even remember the plot of one to this day. so they were easy to read. I remember that much, but nonfiction is where I've kind of settled, and that's probably where I'm going to stay for the most part. So
Do you
no.
find nonfiction harder to recommend, Bruce, over fiction?
Well, again, I just don't read a lot of stuff like this, right? Like, quite honestly, I pick up books. I read on how to, treatment and how to work with people with post-traumatic stress syndrome and stuff like that, right? So it's,
Pretty specific.
very specific, right?
Yeah.
Or I read a lot of spiritual type stuff, but more of the new age type spiritual things. So I could probably recommend a book there that I found appealing, but beyond that, reading stuff like this is pretty rare for me. So,
Do you ever recommend some of those spiritual books to some of your people that
Oh,
come to your
I certainly
sessions and
have,
stuff?
yeah.
It doesn't. You can just do it. It doesn't bother you.
Oh no, not in those environments. So
That's the environment of
yeah.
the book's audience,
That-
right?
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what those people are there looking for. So,
What about you, JP?
I love recommending books.
You
I
guys
mean,
are a perfect couple.
Honestly, the person I think I recommend books to the most is Maya.
Too much.
But-
I have like
Yeah,
15 Kindle books to catch up on. Like, I
But
go
it's-
in and there's
it's-
another one. I'm like, oh my god.
but you read a lot, so like to make sure you're stuck. Otherwise, I often end up actually. I mean, I generally read science fiction or nonfiction at this point in my life, at this stage. So when it comes to people that don't read along those veins, I actually end up relying a lot on things I have absorbed from being around.
Yeah, I think, and there's always authors that you can kind of pick up, right?
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that the boys, and I want to move to us whether we like it, but all the guys tend to say, well, I don't read that much in that, so I can't recommend it. So you guys tend to be like, I have to have read it and liked it to recommend it.
I couldn't recommend
Oh,
one
no,
of the things
I recommend a lot of things that I haven't read.
Okay, interesting. So I do. I have no problem recommending something I haven't read because I tend to know. I read when you buy for the library, you have to read. You have to read a lot of like reviews and the backs of books, so I generally know what they're going to be about, and you have an idea of the type of writer that person is, whether they write character books or plot books or whatever. So I can recommend those that way, and you don't have a problem with it.
Do you have a problem if you recommend something to someone and you're like, you will love this book? This, like, I saw this,
Oh, I
it came
never
across
say
my
that.
table, and like, okay, fine, like, I thought of you a lot. I thought you should read this book, it would be great. And they're like, yeah, no thanks.
If I say that, I've read it.
Okay.
Yeah, for me to say that, I'd have to have read it.
Yeah.
First.
I like
So
to
when you
recommend
get
books too.
Recommendations from her, they're probably like really
They're probably
good,
spot
but
on, yeah.
you know,
She
She's
probably
got-
hasn't read it.
No.
we were talking about this. This is
Because
her
I don't like
superpower.
a lot of books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She
Like,
doesn't.
I
You guys
can-
have watched. If anyone's watched the series for a while, she does not
Yeah,
like
she's
a
the
lot of
naysayer
it
for
stuff.
I really don't. Like, usually I'm like, meh. I have to, yeah.
This is
Yeah,
why
good
she
book
reads
for
so
me
much
to
because
like
she's
it.
like, well, that one sucks.
I have discerning tastes in my books. Yes, out of like 20 books, I'm gonna like 3 probably,
Yeah.
kind of
I
thing.
gotta say it's an
Or
obvious
like
one.
really like.
I love how you're so tenacious that you just
Just
keep going.
Yeah,
Pick up the next
going
one.
for it.
you either like it or you don't, right? So.
Yeah, but I do
TV,
think
movies.
like you said, when you are around books a lot and you read the backs and you kind of, and just because I didn't like it, I can still see a great value in a book because I think they're very particular tastes, but I'm like that with a lot of things. Like, I'm not gonna sit down and watch every single show on Netflix.
Yeah.
No. Like, I'm like, there's probably 2 shows on there that I might actually give my time to, kind of thing, and then that are gonna be worth it, and then I'm gonna actually be like, that was so worth my time. I feel kind of, I don't want to say it about a TV show, but like better for watching it, or at least like better for my enjoyed time. Like, I feel like, oh, okay, I feel like relaxed, or I had that relaxing time, not just like, meh.
I'll never get that 2 hours back.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, And even with books that I walk away and don't like, I'm trying to defend myself a little bit. Most of them I don't feel that way.
You
I
don't
won't
have
finish
to
them.
defend yourself.
I won't finish them if I'm like, this is just, oh my gosh, like not worth the paper. I just put it away. Like,
That's not totally true.
well, I don't know.
You'll finish them, but you'll finish them by like skipping to
Here's
the
the
last
judgment.
20 pages. Not judging. Not
This
judging.
person takes 4 months to read a magazine.
Everywhere.
So we've
Someone
we
put
had
thought into it.
a wonderful group of guests here this evening.
I know,
think
right?
I think we've gone longer than normal. So thank you for sticking with us. If you've stuck with us.
Well, we had
this
3
far.
extra babes. We had to make sure we gave them time.
Exactly, and that is why everyone is still with us.
Next month it's only us, but we're gonna come at you. It's back to school and back to those classics that you're forced to read, or what our version of a classic is, kind of thing. So, in Shauna's case, the classics she reads
She
5 times a
like
year.
devours. We've talked a little bit about
I
this,
have my
so-
own classics I read. I feel like it's So we're gonna explore the word classic in literature, and I actually feel like we could go on for a while about that one.
Yeah.
Because it's a really interesting world how we define modern classic or old classic and what made them a classic. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna start already because
So join us next time for
classics.
Days of Books.
Thank you for coming.
Have a good
Oh, and
evening.
thanks, Pandora's.
Thank you, Pandora.